Hello and welcome back to Talos of Tech, or Applesheep Reacts. A lot of people were requesting this one and we've been thinking about doing it for a while, and I want to do our full disclosure agreement before we talk about this particular YouTuber. Just because we have disagreements about Apple, it does not mean I hate him. In fact, I've watched some other stuff on his channel. In fact, I agree with him on a lot of other subjects, but because I'm primarily known on YouTube as the Applesheep, there were some inconsistencies in this video that I felt like I needed to clear up. And ironically, his video is 10 minutes and 9 seconds, which is the Apple time if you check your Apple Watch. But whatever, let's begin.
Most of you probably heard the recent scandal they had, where Apple got caught slowing down their phones with updates in order to push users into buying newer models. Pretty scummy and underhanded if you ask me.
So you'll notice this is a common theme throughout the video, is just kind of poorly researched. Not really bringing up why Apple slowed down older iPhones, disregarding the entire iOS 11.3 update we just saw that allows you to manage your battery's performance, especially after Apple explained why they did it, which was that phones were shutting down before they got to 0% battery life. So on older phones, they decided to slow down the CPUs so that the battery wouldn't degrade as fast and the longevity of the phone would last. This is something not other companies do because they want you to buy a new phone every year. Apple's latest version of iOS can run back all the way to the iPhone 5S, whereas Google is discontinuing phones they used to sell 2 years ago. But Apple's supporting phones that are pushing 5 years old. That's because they want it to last. You could argue that they're trying to get you to buy a new iPhone and that's why they're slowing down the CPU, but when you think about it, if they really wanted you to do that, they could have just not slowed down the CPU and then had the batteries degrade and the phones start dying at 30-40%. I think that would be more of an incentive to be like, hey, stop using this old phone, buy a new one. But no, they want your old phone to work as good as long as possible, so they keep issuing patches to it. You'll notice not a lot of Android phones are able to actually last as long as iPhones are, and if they do, you'll definitely notice them starting to die before they hit 0%, and that battery having a significant loss definitely annoyed people. That's one of the reasons Apple implemented this CPU slowdown update, was because so many people were complaining about it. This is how they can fix it. But no, they just want more money. That's all it is.
Here it is! Wait, look up! Look, use your head! Turn! See it!
Don't touch me. Go again.
It looks so good!
But come to
This is a common thing he loves to cut to throughout this video, is just iJustine being herself. I'm very confused by this because I think what he was going for was just look at the Apple fan base. This is a typical Apple fangirl. But if you knew anything about what you were researching, you might not use this because you may realize iJustine is like this for everything. iJustine fangirls over the Galaxy S9. iJustine fangirls over the Xbox, over drones. iJustine fangirls over making a cake. So while we may look at her in this video and be like, see, people just love Apple blindly, there is some truth to it. Some people like having like a sports team that they support, and it's not exclusive to just Apple. There are people who will refuse to use Apple just because it's very mainstream. I know a lot of people like that, and a lot of people that will just defend Samsung as much as possible or defend the Pixel as much as possible. All phones have fan bases, but if you're gonna use an Applesheep as an example, iJustine I think is a bad one because her channel is not really tech journalism. It's mostly just her life. And on top of that, like I said, she fangirls over everything. This is not just an Apple thing.
First of all, I have one of those iPhones they've been slowing down with updates. The iPhone 5S has been my mobile device for about 3 or 4 years now.
So this amazes me. He's still using an iPhone 5S while showing footage of an iPhone 10. You have a very old phone, sir. So if you're noticing slowdowns, it's a combination of a lot of things. For one, it's Apple trying to make sure your battery lasts longer. And as he'll even mention, he notices his battery dying before it hits 0, which is the problem Apple's trying to solve with the CPU slowdown. The fact that you have that old a phone that is still being supported by Apple with new iOS updates, yeah, if you're switching to Android, don't expect that. If you have an Android phone for that long, you're not getting support for that long. It'll just start dying at 30-40%.
Now I know some would say it's time for a replacement after 3 years, but I say if Apple's going to continue to charge over $1,000 for iPhones, they should last much longer than this.
iPhones do last much longer than this. I still have a working original iPhone. And on top of that, that perfectly constructed headline of if Apple keeps charging $1,000 for phones, Apple is selling 4 iPhones. One of them is over $1,000. It's one that people really enjoy and people want want to use, but you are by no means required to go with this one. In fact, if at ever point you are watching this video, I really recommend you buy an iPhone SE. It's got the same build as your 5S with a faster CPU. It still has a headphone jack. I'm sure you'll complain about that later. Very powerful camera, and all of that starting at $350. A third of what you're claiming Apple charges all iPhones for. If you want something a little nicer, we still have the iPhone 8, the iPhone 8 Plus, all under $1,000. But no, of course, we just have to say they charge over $1,000 for iPhones.
What are you doing, Jen?
Just looking at the new computer, the new iMac.
Look at it.
The touch.
To be fair, it's easy to buy anything, everything when you're rich. If you're rich, it means you can just buy whatever you want, as iJustine does. It's not hard to research this. You can go to her channel and see what types of things she unboxes and uses, and it by no means is exclusive to Apple. It is everyone.
That brings us to Apple's notorious streak of implementing planned obsolescence. One of those, which basically means they purposely make their products cheap and breakable in order to force their customers to update and buy more often. The auto industry has been notorious for implementing this tactic for decades. Back in the day, cars from the 80s and 90s and earlier, they used to last much longer than current models do. But once car companies realized they could make them cheaper with less expensive plastics instead of metal, well, they realized they could also make more money by getting people to upgrade their vehicles every year. And that's pretty much what Apple has been doing for years now.
Except Apple doesn't use cheap plastics for their build. If anything, it's the exact opposite. Apple's switching to Ion X glass and sapphire steel and trying to find the most durable aluminum as possible. I get what you're making about the comparison with car companies switching to cheaper materials, but all we've seen with Apple is them try to make more premium builds over time. That, at least in my experience, lasts a lot longer. I still know lots of people that can use an iPhone 7, an iPhone 6S. And I even know people like yourself that can still use an iPhone 5S to this day, and for an iPhone's life, that's not bad at all. If you had some evidence to support here's cheaper materials Apple's using in their iPhones, then I would agree with you, but we just don't really have proof of that. They're using more and more expensive technology that will hopefully make the phone last longer. I would not call that planned obsolescence. Battery technology, if that's what you're referring to, has not changed in the past 10 years. It's still just trying to pack lithium into a smaller space, and in that case, newer iPhones have better battery lives. They have longer battery lives, which is the opposite of planned obsolescence. And as we've seen with Apple's CPU down throttling, they favor battery life over CPU speed. Likely because they're insinuating if you have a 4 or 5-year-old iPhone, you probably don't care too much how much it exports a movie, and likely just want it to work as long as possible.
Planned obsolescence. They didn't always do that though. There was a time, I would say before 2010 or 11, where Apple products too would last forever. I have a MacBook Pro from 2011 and it's still going strong to this day. Well, the hardware is. I'll get to the software problems later. But nowadays, every Apple product is built to break. For iPhones, the screens just don't last. The batteries wear out easier, and don't even get me started on the cables.
I'm confused by the screens don't last comment. I'll bring this up again, but I still have a working original iPhone. Display is fine. My father even has a Macintosh Classic that he uses in his classroom, and it still boots up. The screen still works from the 80s. The first iMac I had was from 2007, and I can still plug it in and turn it on and look at the files on it. So anything really I can reference in the past 20, even 30 years of Apple, displays hold up pretty well. And now he's about to talk about why he doesn't like that cables get frayed, but before we get into that, I'd just like to mention that I'm against cables in general. I want to live in a future where we don't have to use wires. That's why I encourage people to do the portless challenge, because yeah, I've gotten frayed cables from Apple, and I've gotten frayed cables from everyone. Third parties make frayed cables, Samsung makes frayed cables. Cables over time just age. Every pair of wired headphones I ever owned always broke at some point. I'm trying to get away from this, and so is Apple. That's why they're moving us to AirPods. They're taking away the headphone jack, is because they want to avoid this, because it's not really necessary anymore. So many people, including myself, can live without wires less and less these days, and USB-C and the iMac Pro are just kind of the final steps before we live in a completely wireless future.
The charging cables break way too easily. I have older Apple charging cables, the 16-pin ones, and they have lasted me since high school. That's over 10 years ago. But these new Lightning cables, they barely last a month before they start breaking and cracking.
This is a bad photo, by the way, if your example wants to be that the 30-pin cables were fine, but the new Lightning ones is bad, because in this picture, the Lightning one looks fairly busted, but these look far, far worse.
And speaking of cables, the cables and the ports themselves also seem to change every year or so now. What cable you need to use.
They don't change every year. They change them once every 5 to 6, maybe? Like iPhones had 30 pins for like 4 to 5 years. Then they switched to Lightning. They still have Lightning since then. MacBooks have had traditional USB ports up until 2015. Then in 2016, they switched to USB-C. And now they're going to have USB-C for another 3-4 years. I don't really see how you can make the claim that it changes every year. It does change, but not that often.
When they decided to remove the headphone jack, that was a bit too much. Now you have to buy the Lightning to audio adapter, which is a ripoff, and
That's included with the purchase of an iPhone that does not have a headphone jack. If you care about that kind of thing and you just want a phone that's cheap and works and has all those ports, again, iPhone SE. But if you want something that's nicer and more fancier with some more premium features, yes, they're encouraging you to switch to wireless. And if you have old wired headphones, you can use the dongle. It's not ideal. They want you to switch to wireless, but don't act like Apple doesn't provide options for all these things.
And there's more problems with Apple and dongles. They sell like 17 different adapters now. It's pretty ridiculous.
You may look at this picture and just be like, oh, look at the crazy amount of adapters they're selling. But what I encourage people to look at is the end ports. The idea behind adapters is to try to move people onto just a handful of standards so that hopefully one day, for the things that we can't replace with wireless, there will just be the port. The reason Apple wants to switch everyone to USB-C is because that port can do anything. It can deliver power, it can deliver video, it can deliver data. All of which faster than that of traditional ports, whether it be HDMI or traditional USB. Thunderbolt 3 can replace all that, be reversible. I, for one, am sick of trying to plug in USB cables and finding out that, oh, it's the wrong way, gotta turn it around. Biggest design mistake of the century. We've probably collectively wasted like man-years of time just on trying to plug in a report that's symmetrical, but you can't plug it in reversibly. USB-C fixes that problem, and the point of these adapters in these dongles, which may feel kind of awkward at the time, is so that one day you won't have to ever have adapters. When you get a cable and you bring it up to a computer, you won't have to go, which port do I plug it into? It will just go in because USB-C will do everything.
Here's a list of all the dongles a user would need to buy for the latest MacBook series.
Before he gets into the dongle, you just need one. Buy one from Quack Quack or some other company. A lot of creators out there need adapters for their MacBook anyway. In fact, he'll bring that up in a second. But for me anyways, we're filming on CFast card readers. MacBooks never had slots for those. We needed an adapter anyway. But one adapter with one USB-C plug-in can bring you back all 3 USB ports, a 4K optimized HDMI port, a power supply port, an Ethernet port, SD card, and micro SD card slot, all with one purchase. That's all the adapters you'll ever need. But if you're dumb and you just buy each individual port separately, yes, it's very ridiculous, but don't be ridiculous. In fact, Thunderbolt 3 is so capable that you could actually buy multiple Quack Quack adapters and then have 6 USB ports, 2 Ethernet ports, 2 SD card slots, and there's 4 more, so you could actually technically have 12 traditional USB ports if you wanted, but that's not an option with older MacBooks because the ports on them are less powerful. Whereas having 4 Thunderbolt 3s, that's actually more powerful. That gives you more options than what the traditional 2015 or 2011 MacBooks used to give you.
And finally, you'll need a USB-C to headphone jack.
This one's very cringy to me because he doesn't even realize that the 2016 and 17 MacBook Pros, they have a headphone jack. He just didn't look at the other side of this. A very simple search to apple.com would have showed you that, oh, on the other side of the MacBook Pro, there is a headphone jack. I should edit that out of my video because it doesn't make sense. But personally, I would be fine if they didn't have a headphone jack on the MacBook either. But this is just a very easy to point out fact that he messed up on.
That means you'll need 4 different dongles just to even start to match up with typical MacBooks.
One Quack Quack, all your ports are back.
I'm also contemplating getting this. This is the best color ever. Don't do it. Oh, you're shaking your head now. I was like, do you don't think I should get the yellow case? It's gonna look so good. So festive for the holidays.
iJustine likes buying iPhone cases. That's why Apple sucks now. Good argument. I mean, should we just all quit as YouTubers because of any cringy channel you can think of? If you want cringy on YouTube, you can find it. But don't let that represent the vast majority of us YouTubers. Similarly, don't let iJustine represent all of Apple's fan base.
Compare that to my 2011 MacBook, which has a dedicated dedicated power port, Ethernet port, FireWire for hard drives, a mini display port for external monitors, 2 USB ports, an SD card reader, a headphone and microphone port. Doesn't even compare to the newer models if you ask me.
My MacBook Pro can do all of those things and more thanks to my QuackWalk adapter. In fact, it took all of those ports, combined them into one port, and still had room for power left over, and then I even have 3 more Thunderbolt 3 ports that I can use for external hard drive data transfer, that I can use for power supply, that I can use for external monitors. To me, I see Thunderbolt 3 as being far more capable than just having single-purpose ports on devices.
When I upgraded my operating system to High Sierra recently, I immediately started noticing problems with my beloved MacBook. Not only was the whole system running slower, which is kind of like those iPhone updates, I also lost the use of one of my most trusted peripherals, the M Audio Fast Track Pro. This new operating system doesn't support my device anymore.
That does suck. I've hated any time you've gotten a computer software update that suddenly makes old accessories not work anymore, but if you don't like system updates that make outdated software not work, I'd really discourage you from using Windows 10 because I've experienced much less success in the Windows 10 field. I still use a Windows 10 PC every day, where every time you turn it off or every time you turn it on, it's got to go through some other update. Whereas at least with Macs, I've noticed that updates are by choice. You won't just wake up one day and they're on unless you have auto update enabled. Even when you disable auto update on the Windows 10 PC, it'll still sometimes decide to update itself. With Mac OS, you can kind of go at your own pace. On top of that, I'd like to say that if your adapter, which I thought you were against having, but I guess it's your adapter, so that's okay. If that doesn't support the new version of macOS, it's usually on that company's fault to not have drivers supporting it. But regardless, that still sucks, and I'm sorry it doesn't work anymore. And I hope you found a fix to it.
Keys?
No, you're driving. Why would I have the keys?
Wow, Christmas sass.
You do this all the
The camera is also gonna die, so I'll probably be continuing this vlog on my iPhone.
She vlogs on her iPhone. What a terrible Apple fanboy. These cuts to iJustine are actually having less and less relevance to the video, which is what kind of bothers me about it. It's just like, iJustine doesn't have her keys. Dang you, Apple!
I mean, with all this said, do you really think we should be buying their products anymore? I don't. If I can't get this microphone set up to work again, I'm gonna just jump ship once and for all. I already have a PC tower set up at home I use for most of my editing anyway. This MacBook was supposed to be my backup, my MacBook backup, and my mobile setup. But now it's almost obsolete, which is exactly what Apple had planned, I'm guessing. I'm pretty sure if Steve Jobs was still around, none of this would be going on. Steve's probably rolling over in his grave as we speak.
Okay, we've all heard the Steve Jobs is rolling over in his grave and we speak, because Steve Jobs never charged more money for products that worked better. But I mean, really though, he's talking about a MacBook he had in like 2011, 2012. 7 to 6 years for a laptop is really, really good, and the fact that it's lasting you this long, and you've even had some nice things to say about it, is impressive, and it's going to be very challenging for you to find a Windows laptop that's going to be able to age that well. It usually just doesn't work out after 3 to 4 years. They get slower, they get unusable, and if you want to talk about planned obsolescence, most Windows laptops are built out of plastic too, unless you want to go the Surface Pro, Surface Book lineup, but then you get to enjoy the $200 Surface dock. Yay! I thought you didn't like expensive adapters, so seems like if you want nice things that last a while, you gotta spend a lot of money, but I'd be very curious to hear about his tech setup now after all this time has passed.
And then maybe I'll do a date with my MacBook, and then maybe I'll do sleeping with my MacBook, and maybe I'll even do, I don't know, coffee with my... I think you get the point.
No one has ever denied that iJustine is obsessed with Apple, including iJustine. She knows she's obsessed. That's kind of the whole shtick with the channel. And she's obsessed with Xbox, Samsung, baking stuff. That's just who she is. Why does that have to resemble all of the Apple fan base? Most of the people I know who buy Apple products aren't like iJustine. They just want something that works and works reliably. But of course, they don't vlog their own lives, so we can't cut to just general people using Apple products for their intended purpose. That wouldn't support his argument.
What do you guys think? Is Apple ruining its brand with these slowing updates and planned obsolescences? I mean, their products are already overpriced to begin with. At least they used to last long and have great features and support. Now I don't really think they're worth the price or the trouble. What do you think?
You don't think they're worth the price after your 5-year-old and 7-year-old Apple devices start slowing down. I'd love to hear you get better support from some other companies, because most of the time your Windows laptop or your Android phone, they're not going to age that that well either. And I'd love you to switch to something else and tell me how that goes. I don't think Apple has planned obsolescence. I think they're catering to their audience the best way they can, and they're trying to make their iPhones last as long as possible. And you're definitely proving that with the fact that you're still using a 5S and seems like to be semi-using a 2011-2012 MacBook. By the way, there's been a different update before the 2016 ones where they got Retina displays and they had less ports. It's just kind of interesting having you compare the 2012 MacBook to the 2016 because there's a whole generation in there that kind of was getting people converted over where there was no CD drive either.
Secret sheets. What are we getting, Jen? Tickets for the lotto. The lotto.
This is like a cool digital screen. These are always like the best gifts because they're super fun and they provide a lot of entertainment and potential money.
I also want to take
Okay, that last one literally had nothing to do with Apple. It was just iJustine being herself. If you want to make a video on why you don't like iJustine, go for it. That's fair. But don't make that Apple. She's not hired by Apple. I don't even think she's sponsored by Apple. You may think she is, but overall, I just found a lot of issues with this video, a lot of factual stuff that was just wrong. And since a lot of people were recommending we react to it, there you go. There's my reaction. Hasn't changed my mind about Apple, especially when someone doesn't really do their research thoroughly. But I hope the owner of this channel is able to get a phone that works for him. It doesn't have to be an iPhone. I'm just hoping he can find that longevity and reliability in other companies. But at the end of the day, I don't know another one that can, and I've tried a lot. If you haven't got a new phone yet, check out that SE. It's cheap, it's got your headphone jack, it's the same build as your current iPhone, and it'll work a lot better. So thank you guys for watching. Let me know of what else you'd like me to react to down in the comments below. This is your Apple Sheep here, and I will see you in the next one.